As you guys know, I have been reviewing a lot of foundations, and a lot of you have wanted my opinions on comparing one against the other, against this one, against that one. So I'm going to be doing this roundup video today, talking about all of the foundations that I have recently covered, which totals 10. And there are 2 that aren't totally brand new, but the rest are basically new releases. So yeah, let's buckle in. This may be a long one, I'm not sure. I'm gonna try and make these reviews like mini reviews for each one, since I basically did like dedicated videos to most of them, and I will link those down below in my description box if you are interested in like more detail and seeing a wear test, etc., etc. So I don't really have a plan for this particular video. This isn't gonna be a ranking video in any way. I do have my favorite out of the bunch, but after that, there are a lot of pros and cons to each of them, and so, you know, I'll be talking about all of that. Let's go ahead and get started with my favorite. Why don't we just start there? We'll just start at the tippy top, the Seurat Dewdrop Foundation. It's what I have on my skin today. I have been using shades 3 and 4, and Beautylish was kind enough to send these to me to test out and review. I do have a dedicated video to this, and it's gorgeous. It is. And I said this in the video, this is the foundation. Like if I had to create a foundation, this is what I would want it to be. It has a light medium coverage. It has a really lovely consistency. It's a little bit on the thinner side, but it's not watery. It still has a kind of creamy texture to it. And there is a little bit of radiance. It's not too much where you look sweaty or oily or greasy or anything like that. It just gives your skin a kind of glow from within, just this really kind of subtle satin kind of radiance, and it's very, very natural. I have highlighter on just, you know, over here on my cheekbones, but I didn't put it anywhere else. So any other kind of sheen that you see is really just from this foundation. It's gorgeous. I absolutely love it. And many of you have actually been asking me to compare it to the Surreal Skin Foundation Wand. This is the like original Seurat Beauty Foundation. This is the one that has the brush on the top. And I love this foundation. This is a gorgeous foundation. I love the packaging because it's really easy to travel with. This was like my go-to travel foundation for a very, very long time, and I love it. And I have shades 3 and 4 also. I don't know if all the shades kind of correspond to one another, like if you're 3 or 4 in the wand, that's what you would be in the dewdrop. I don't know for sure, but that is how it worked for me. So I use 3 and 4 in the wand, I use 3 and 4 in the dewdrop. The main difference between these two foundations is the coverage. This definitely has more of a medium coverage versus the light medium. This also has more of a skin-like finish. It's a very natural, it's a very lovely finish, but there isn't that little bit of radiance that the dewdrop has. And then the texture of the foundation wand is thicker than it is of the dewdrop. So those are the 3 main differences, and you know, aside from the packaging, but those are the 3 main differences between these 2 foundations, I would say, is the texture, the coverage, and the finish that you get. One thing I do want to amend from my original dedicated video to these is I mentioned that I didn't think 2 drops was enough for your entire face, because that is what they suggest. It was either on the box or maybe on the website that they say 1 to 2 drops should cover your entire face. When I filmed that video, these were brand new, and so the drop that I had was very small. But now that I've used these quite a bit, when I actually depress the dropper, I get a much bigger amount. So I think it just kind of had to work its way through this little dropper system. And now I feel like, yes, if you use 2 drops of this foundation, you will definitely cover your entire face if you want like a light medium coverage. It is buildable. I would build this up to maybe like a light medium, you know, like maybe leaning towards medium just a little bit, but I wouldn't use more than that for this foundation. I just feel like it takes away from what it's meant to do, which is kind of leave your skin still shining through a little bit. It just kind of perfects it, if you will. It just perfects what you have going for you. So I love this foundation, and personally I like this packaging. I know some people thought it was gimmicky or whatever. So it's basically like a built-in dropper. So you have like a dropper top here, this is clear, and then you have this rubber button at the bottom that you press and the foundation comes out. I really like this system because I don't like when like the dropper is part of the cap and the button is at the top here and you pull it out and there's this whole dropper situation. It always gets messy, and I feel like you're introducing like a lot of air to it because you take the dropper out, then you have to depress the button, then you got to put it back in, then you take it out, and then you're doing that several times, and I'm just not a fan of that. This, to me, it stays a little bit more sanitary. It stays a little bit more fresh this way. Anyway, I really, really like this packaging. So that's the Seurat Dewdrop Foundation. This one, out of all the foundations I'm going to be talking about, is my personal favorite. I thought it wore really well, and when I did my full day wear test, I didn't powder my face, and I thought my face looked, you know, a little bit more radiant after a full day wear. So I do think that this would be a decent one for all skin types. If you have an oilier skin type, I would just powder, you know, I would just powder and set down the foundation the way you normally would. And that's it. I don't think, if you use like a light translucent powder, I don't think it takes away from the finish of this foundation. Like right now, I have a very light dusting of the Kogan Do Natural Lighting Powder all over, and I don't feel like it takes away from like the beautiful sheen and light coverage of this foundation. I think it's really beautiful. So I do think that any skin type could use this, but most ideally I would say like dry to normal skin type. The next foundation I feel like I should talk about, because it kind of reminds me of the Seurat Dewdrop Foundation, is the Sisley Phyto-Teint Ultra Eclat Foundation. I have it in the shade Soft Beige. I purchased this off of the Saks.com site, and I really didn't have any expectations of this foundation. I have two other Sisley foundations, the Tinted Sunscreen Cream, and then their Sisley, their anti-aging foundation. And for some reason, this just never really appealed to me, maybe because it's oil-free and I have dry skin, and, you know, the idea of something being oil-free doesn't necessarily kind of grab my attention. But I did really want to try this because I had heard good things about the original formula. So unfortunately, I never tried the original formula, so I can't compare the two for you. But if you want to watch Abby Bliss White's video on this, she has tried the previous version of this foundation and also this one. We actually did a collab for this foundation, and so she compares the two of them. And so if you're interested in the original or previous formula of this, you may be interested in seeing her video, just FYI, because she talks about both. Anyway, I really, really love this foundation. It has a very similar texture to the Seurat. It's on the thinner side, but it's not watery. And what I will say is I think the coverage right off the bat is a little bit heavier than the Dewdrop. So I think with like a couple pumps of this foundation all over your face, you pretty much start out with a light medium coverage. And I do think that you can build this up to like a medium coverage foundation, where I think the Dewdrop is a little bit lighter than that. The finish of this foundation is also a little bit more natural than the Dewdrop. It doesn't have that kind of built-in radiance. It is very just natural skin-like. It doesn't look flat. It doesn't look matte or powdery or anything like that. And this product, like I think all of Sisley's products, it has a lot of skincare in here. It has anti-pollution properties in here. It's non-comedogenic. So it has a lot of wonderful skincare in there. What I find the most impressive about this foundation is that it is long-lasting. It claims to be long-lasting. It really is long-lasting. I can't remember exactly how long I did my wear test for when I did this dedicated video. I think it was either 10 or 11 hours. And because it's so light, because it's oil-free, because it really is just like, you can't feel it at all on your skin, I really thought that by the end of the day, I wasn't going to see much of it left. I thought, you know, long-lasting, what does that mean, 8 hours? This foundation looked like pretty much exactly the same as when I first put it on. I feel like it faded maybe around the tip of my nose a little bit, but that's it. And I've worn this foundation a couple of times under different circumstances, where I've just been home, where I've been out sweating, where I've been out just kind of running errands in and out of different temperatures and things like that. It's really, really long lasting, at least on my dry skin type. I didn't put down any primer either, so there wasn't any kind of like tacky primer underneath to kind of keep this to the skin. Nothing like that. This just is very, very, very long lasting. And I would say this is the one thing that kind of beats it out over the Dewdrop. The Dewdrop isn't, I wouldn't say is like not long lasting. It just looked a little bit more radiant at the end of my wear test. But this one it just looked exactly the same. It's really, really interesting. It's very, very magical. So I was very, very impressed with this foundation, and I really enjoy it. And in terms of different skin types, this is one of those rare magical unicorns that I feel like really is good for dry, normal, combo, oily skin. I think this would work for just about anyone. I think because this didn't change in appearance on my skin at all, on my dry skin, I think if you have oily skin, maybe some radiance will shine through. by the end of the day, but it is oil free, so I think it is oily skin friendly. I just think it's really, really wonderful. So in terms of comparing it to the Sisley anti-aging foundation, I have this in the shade 0.R, which is vanilla, and again, I have this in soft beige. Both basically work on my skin tone. Ideally, I just like a neutral foundation, but these both seem to work for me, just FYI. But in terms of comparing the actual formulas, this one is creamier. The texture of it is creamier, and the coverage is heavier. I would say this one is like a medium. And then comparing it to the Sisley Tinted Sunscreen Cream, this one also is a much thicker consistency. It's almost like a face cream. It's even thicker. It's thicker than this. This is the thickest consistency out of the three. And the coverage, I want to say, is even a little bit more than the Sisley. This definitely has a good amount of coverage, I find. And this does not necessarily have a lot of radiance to it. This one has kind of like a natural skin-like appearance to it, much like this oil-free one. This tinted sunscreen cream, I would say probably because of the SPF in there, it has like a little bit of radiance when you put it on. It really looks like you're putting face cream on and it's tinted, which I guess is why it's called the tinted sunscreen cream. Go Michele. So that's just a quick comparison of the other two Sisley based products that I have. But I'm really, really enjoying this, and I would recommend this for all skin types. The other foundation I want to talk about in terms of being like one of the best that I've tried of recent. This is not a new foundation. This is the one not new foundation in this group, but that is the Chantecaille Future Skin Oil-Free Gel Foundation. And I went out and purchased Chamomile, which was too warm for me, and I liked it so much I decided, let me try Vanilla, which is the shade that I use in their Just Skin Tinted Moisturizer. So I haven't gotten a chance to try them, but I'm hoping that either the combination of the two or just the vanilla will work better for me than just the chamomile. This foundation I found to be fairly similar to the Sisley in that it has a very natural skin-like appearance. I find that it has like a light medium coverage. They state that this is like a medium full coverage. I don't find that at all. I think you could build it up to like a medium, maybe a medium full, but I find this looks best with like one layer and I get a nice like light medium coverage. So that's my personal experience with this. I love the texture of this. It has a gel base. It is also oil free, which is maybe why it reminds me of this one. But because of the gel base in here, it does feel very, very cool on the skin. And this also, again, much like the Sisley, the more I talk about it, the more I feel like there's a lot of similarities between the two. I didn't really feel it on my skin, and by the end of the day I thought, I don't feel anything, so it's probably just completely worn away, but which is fine or whatever. It was all still there, but I want to say it wasn't quite as long lasting as the Sisley in that I didn't really see that much wearing away, but I did feel like my skin looked a little bit more radiant by the end of the day. So there is that. I don't like this jar, the jar that it comes in. It's messy, and I feel like the texture's not that thin that it could have been in a pump. I don't know. I don't know why it's in a jar. So one thing I do want to mention about this, and I forgot to mention about the Seurat and the Sisley, is that there's no added fragrance in here and there's no scent to this foundation. So that is a very big plus for me. The Sisley, I don't believe there's any added fragrance, but there is a scent, and I think it's the gardenia flower extract. Again, there's like skincare products in here, and I think that's what I'm smelling. And then for the Seurat, there's no fragrance or no scent to this either. So when I started raving about the Seurat Dewdrop Foundation, because that is my favorite at the moment, many of you asked me, well, how does it compare to the Guerlain L'Essentiel? Their Natural Glow 16-Hour Wear Foundation. Because this was like my favorite a couple months ago. Did I mention it in my favorites? Anyway, I do love this foundation. I think it is really, really gorgeous on the skin. So I have it in the shade 02N. I find that this has a little bit more radiance than any of the other foundations I've talked about, more so than the Dewdrop, and then I feel like the shine or the radiance in this is a little bit more prominent. The Dewdrop foundation, as you guys can see, it's just like this very pretty kind of like finish, where this just looks like moisturizer. The coverage of this I find to be a light medium, and then the one downside to this is that it does have fragrance. I happen to like the fragrance in here. It smells actually very, very nice to me. But again, I would always prefer something with just zero fragrance. So that's definitely one downside for me. This one does have SPF 20 in here, which kind of beats out the other three that I've talked about so far. The other three that I've talked about, I don't think have SPF in there. Sometimes there is, and it's not labeled because it's the US. But anyway, none of them are labeled to have any SPF, and this one has an SPF of 20. I still really, really enjoy this foundation, and you know, maybe I love the Seurat because it's the brand new shiny thing in my collection, but I really just like the finish of this dewdrop so much. It's a very elegant kind of glow as opposed to something that's just kind of like moisturizing looking on your skin. But would I recommend this to you guys still? Definitely. I love this foundation. It's beautiful, and I still very much enjoy it. Okay, let's move on to these two foundations, and I'm talking about them together because they both have alcohol in there. So this is the Pat McGrath Skin Fetish Sublime Perfection Foundation. I have it in the shade Light 6. And then this is the Guerlain Perur Gold. I have it in the shade 12. And alcohol is the third ingredient in this foundation, and alcohol is the fourth ingredient in this foundation. So the Pat McGrath foundation is of a very light, runny kind of consistency. It's actually even lighter than the Sisley. It's lighter than the Seurat Dewdrop. It's like more watery. So that's not my favorite consistency. But beside that, and it comes in a pump, which is great. But aside from that, it has a very light medium coverage. I think what is really actually kind of great about this foundation, because it is so light, you can just layer it on and layer it on and layer it on. And you can even build this up to like a medium full if you wanted to. You can just kind of keep going because it's such a thin consistency. I think you can actually very easily kind of customize the coverage that you want, which I think is pretty cool. But kind of like right out of the bottle, it really does have like a light medium coverage, which again, I happen to really enjoy. I really liked the way this foundation looked on my skin. Granted, I was very disappointed that there was alcohol in here. As someone with eczema, it's just an ingredient that I just, better safe than sorry. I just want to stay away from it. I just keep reading more and more about how alcohol isn't just drying to the skin, but that it really does kind of like disturb the barrier of your skin, which is the issue when you have eczema. So unfortunately, this is a foundation that I just can't wear very often, despite the fact that I like the way it looks on my skin. I think it actually looks very nice. I did try this with the primer and the powder, the whole system. The primer, I thought, actually made this foundation look worse on my skin. I don't know how that's possible, but I really liked this foundation on my bare skin or over my skincare, after I've washed and put all my skincare on and put this directly on. It looked great. When I put the primer on, I just didn't think it looked that great on my skin. I feel like it lost a little bit of its like very natural kind of like skin-like finish. It just looked more dull, if that makes any sense. I don't know why. I don't know why that primer would have done that, but that's the experience that I had. And then the powder, I did not like at all. It made my skin look very dry, despite how much I used. Very little, a little bit more. It just did not look good on my skin. So out of the entire system, I did like the foundation the most. And I do think it looks really nice on my skin. I can pretty much say the same thing about the Guerlain Perur Gold foundation. This is like a newly reformulated foundation of one that was existing in their line. That's a foundation I never tried, unfortunately, so I can't compare the two for you. But this foundation, it looks great. I think it actually looks really great on my skin. It's actually kind of similar to this L'Essentiel, and no surprise, they're both Guerlain, but they kind of have a similar consistency. It does not have the same scent as this one, but there is kind of a scent to this one. And again, it's a pleasant fragrance. It's not something that bothers me. I just wish that there was no fragrance whatsoever to it. But the consistency is very similar to this one. It kind of has just like a nice kind of creamy foundation consistency. And one thing I did notice with the Pat McGrath is that I could kind of feel the foundation dry down. Once it was kind of done drying down and like setting down, I didn't feel like it felt dry on my skin until the very end of the day. So I think right around the 7 or 8 hour mark, I could kind of feel like the tightness on my skin again. And that was definitely a con for this foundation. But with this one, despite the fact that alcohol is the third ingredient here and the fourth one in here, maybe it's the consistency because this one is creamier. I didn't feel any kind of dry down. I couldn't feel the alcohol in here basically when I could feel it in the Pat McGrath. But I really like the way this one looked on my skin. It had a very light medium to medium coverage, just really beautiful. It had a very nice finish. I want to say it was a little bit more radiant than like the Pat McGrath. Again, it was very similar to this one. I do think right out of the bottle, this one had a little bit more coverage. So if that's what you're looking for, and alcohol doesn't bother you or fragrance doesn't bother you, then I would definitely recommend this. I thought this wore really well. This was an excellent foundation. Again, because of the alcohol, it's not something I can wear often, but I think it looks very beautiful on the skin. All right, let's talk about some of these full coverage foundations that I tested out. Now, you guys know full coverage is not really my jam, but I like to, demo and show you guys these products in case you have one, a similar skin tone to mine, and two, if you have a similar skin type to mine, you happen to like full coverage foundations. So I try and, remove myself from the prejudices that I personally have against full coverage foundations and kind of give you like a really unbiased kind of opinion and review about those foundations. So anyway, let me start with the big fail. This was really awful, and I don't think this was because I just don't like full coverage foundations. It was really the consistency of this. It's a foundation balm, and this is the one from Kevyn Aucoin. I have it in the shade Light FB 4.5, which I do think was too light for my skin tone. But this was too, it was definitely full coverage. If you like full coverage, you may want to look at this one. But for me, it was the balm consistency. It just sat on your skin. So not only does a full coverage foundation, it will always look a little bit more mask-like than a light coverage one for obvious reasons. But this was really mask-like because it just sat on top of your skin. There was no kind of like blending in. And I did get a lot of suggestions from you guys, which was awesome, that you thought that I used too much or whatever, and I thought maybe I did. So I actually tried it again myself. I used just a little bit. I went in with the brush and, I just kind of started with where I thought I looked the most red and discolored and had like, have my hyperpigmentation. But my problem with this is because it doesn't really kind of blend into your skin, because it just sort of sits on top of my skin. If I only kind of put a little bit here and there, you could see where it like ended and where it stopped. So then I would pick up a little bit more and like kind of keep blending it out. And then, by the time I finished kind of doing that and making it even appearing on my skin, I had that mask like just too thick appearance. And I thought, okay, it's just not for me. I did see a lot of comments saying that this worked for you, that you think that this is probably meant more for oilier skin types. And maybe so. It's hard for me to imagine because this balm feels so oily in a way. I think it's actually more silicone-y is probably the better word for it. And maybe just when it kind of melds with oils on your skin, that works a little bit better. But I think when you have dry skin, it just kind of sits on top and it kind of clung to like weird patches. It just wasn't good. So for me, this was kind of the big fail. And I don't think it's because it was the fact that it was a full coverage foundation. I think it's just the texture and the formula of this foundation. So unfortunately, this did not work out for me. The other full coverage foundation I used, I actually don't know if this is new. I don't think this is new. I think this has been out a while, but this is the xoxo Perfecting Cushion Intense. And I know they have other cushion foundations, one that has lighter coverage, one that's like brightening, but this one is the full coverage one. And this definitely had full coverage. And I thought it looked really nice on the skin upon first application. But because this has SPF 50 in there, I feel like I started to see it break down around the 4 or 5 hour mark, around there somewhere. But it just started to look chalky. And I think that's the SPF ingredient in there. It started to look chalky around my nose. It started to look chalky around my forehead. It's almost like the SPF and the foundation kind of separate. And like the SPF kind of just rises to the top or just sits there while the foundation either gets absorbed or gets kind of worn away. So I thought this looked great. The first few hours that I wore it, I thought it looked really nice, but it broke down pretty quickly. So that was my issue with this one. And many of you commented that you really love the regular perfecting cushion, not the intense one, and the perfecting cushion brightening one, that's like your holy grail and you absolutely love it. So if I ever get a chance, I would like to try those other cushions. But this intense one, the longevity just isn't there. The wear time isn't there. And then the last full coverage foundation I want to talk about is the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Foundation. I tried the shade number 5, which was way too warm and too deep for me. And then Beautylish sent me 3 and 4 to try out. So I have not gotten a chance to try out these colors like all over my face. I have swatched them. They are definitely a better match for me than 5, but neither of them are perfect. There's something about the undertone that's a little bit off. These are supposed to be neutral, but they're very, very, very warm, very, very like yellowy in undertone. But aside from the actual shade match, the formula, I thought out of all the full coverage foundations that I tried, I thought this one was the best. Now, when I first put it on, I thought it accentuated some of my lines. I thought it accentuated my pores. It really just didn't do anything for my lines. But I think that's just the characteristic of full coverage foundations. I think because they're full coverage that they do end up accentuating some things that you may not want them to accentuate. But I liked this the more and more the day went on, because my experience with full coverage foundations is that they generally end up looking more and more matte, more and more cakey, and that they just kind of like, you know, they don't do much for my skin, and that becomes more and more obvious as the day goes on. But this foundation, I felt as the day went on, like looked a little bit better because my skin actually looked a little bit more radiant. A lot more radiance kind of peeked through this full coverage foundation, which I was surprised at. And yeah, by the end of the day, I liked it. I liked it more than I did at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of my wear test, because I felt like my skin looked a little bit more natural at the end of the day, even though it was still full coverage. The coverage was still there for sure by the end of the day. Where it did wear away was like the tip of my nose and like right around the sides of my nose. It did definitely start to kind of like cake up a little bit. It did start to kind of like break up a little bit. So that was not great. But everywhere else, I thought it looked pretty good for like a full coverage foundation. So out of the 3 that I tried, this one was the best. All right, and we are down to the last 2 here, and these are like tinted moisturizers. So I just recently talked about this Amorepacific Complexion Perfector in my Clean Beauty video, and I pinned a comment talking about how this one wore. So this, I believe this is new. This is definitely deemed Clean Beauty by Sephora, and there's 4 shades, and I have the shade Light. And while this does not have any labeling for SPF, I did see that there was titanium dioxide and zinc oxide in here. So I think there is some sun protection. I just don't know how much. I really enjoyed this product when I first put it on. I thought it looked really, really nice. It has a light medium coverage. There is definitely a bit of glow to it. That kind of like sunscreen glow that you get. It looks a little bit oily, but it's not quite that shiny. But I will say by the end of the day, I did start to see it kind of breaking away around my nose, and it started to look powdery and chalky a little bit. Again, I don't know if it's the SPF in here because there's no labeling, but it did have that appearance like around my nose. So I don't think that this is long wearing, but I do think this is like perfect for like a weekend no makeup look. It just had a really lovely kind of like natural appearance, and it's one of the products that I feel like you could put on and you don't need to put on like a full face of makeup. You could kind of just put a little bit of this on, put on a little bit of tinted lip balm, some mascara or whatever, and you would look fine. Like it lets enough of your skin shine through that you can get away with just using this. So it's quite lovely, and Amorepacific is known for their skincare, and I've tried a few of their skincare products, like their firming neck cream, their thermal cleansing balm, which I really enjoy. I enjoy the neck cream as well, and their Ultra More mud mask that I use just in specific parts of my face if they're feeling really oily. That is a great mud mask. It really kind of draws out impurities. So I'm a big fan of this brand, and I was happy to see this base product, and I do think it's lovely. I just don't think it lasts like all day. And then finally, I feel like I've been talking for hours. Finally, the Laura Mercier Tinted Moisturizer. I did a look with the illuminating one, and this definitely left my skin very, very glowy. Laura Mercier sent these to me, and they sent me Natural Radiance and then 3N1 Sand. Both shades are a little bit too deep for me, a little bit too warm, but the Natural Radiance I kind of could get away with. Basically, it looked like I had you know, a little bit of a tan on my face. As long as I brought it down my neck, it was like I could kind of get away with it. And they talk about how you can use this as a really subtle highlight, or you can use this all over the way I did as like a glowy base. And it is a glowy base. So I would not recommend that for oily skin. I think if you have oily skin, that's probably your worst nightmare, is to put on a really kind of like glowy base. But for someone with dry skin, I really liked it. I thought it looked really pretty on the skin, but it's definitely like a subtle highlight all over your skin. It's almost like if you took a foundation and you added like liquid highlight into it, this is what you would end up with. So I really liked it. I thought it looked very pretty on the skin. Same with this tinted moisturizer. I played around with this one, this sand color. I didn't wear it all day. I just kind of wanted to see how the shade looked and how it looked without the illuminating properties in there. And it's beautiful. They both have SPF 30, by the way. I should mention that. And they are both definitely moisturizers. So I felt like I was just kind of putting lotion all over my face, and it definitely had that appearance too. So there is quite a bit of radiance to these. I think dry, normal skin would probably really enjoy these. Again, you maybe would want to stay away from these if you have oilier skin, but I thought that they looked really nice on my skin type. I just need to find the proper shade for this. It's really the only reason why I haven't been reaching for them, because they're just the wrong shade. And if you want a subtle highlight, I would definitely recommend this. It's very pretty. And like many of the products actually I talked about, this is like a reformulated version of their previous tinted moisturizer. I never tried their previous tinted moisturizer. I don't know why. I like Laura Mercier. A tinted moisturizer is right up my alley, but I just never tried it. So I can't speak to how this compares to the older version, but I do really like this one. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me, and I hope this video was helpful for you. There has been a lot of foundation reviews, and I don't want to say that I won't be reviewing any new foundations in the near future. I may, if an interesting one does come out, but I think I'm okay for now. I think I'm good for now. So give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe down below if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video.